Welcome back to my PICO-8 audio tutorial. In this one I'm going to go over the tracker view and explain that a little bit and how to navigate it. So let's go ahead and get started. Now we're going to start a new sound and go up here to this icon, and that brings up the tracker view. And you'll notice that some of the things are similar between the wave editor and the tracker editor, and that is the speed, the loop, and the waveforms. But we also have a few new things. The effects are down here, and we have the default octave that we're going to be inserting into the tracker view, and the default volume, which you can select by clicking one of these. So we're going to go ahead and keep it at the second octave, and the way that you insert data into the tracker view is by using the keyboard. So Q and Z on the keyboard are actually the start of the octaves that you can input through the keyboard, and it starts with C. So we can actually, I'm going to start with Q and insert a couple notes here. That was just going up the keyboard one at a time. And it's actually laid out a lot like a piano, so if you're familiar with playing piano or a keyboard or whatever, that should be relatively familiar. If not, play around with it, and if you're familiar with music theory, this should be fairly straightforward. But we're going to go over the columns here real quick, and in the first column is going to be the note letter. So we can actually navigate through each one of these rows by pressing up and down, and we can navigate through the columns by pressing left and right. And as you can see, it actually loops around. If I press up at the first one, it goes to the last, and if I press down, it goes to the first. So if we go over to the second column, what you see here is actually the octave that is being played. So right here you can see that this is the second octave. We can change this value by typing in a number with the number keys. So if we wanted to up it to the third octave, we can do that by just replacing each one of them. And let's go ahead and play it and see how it sounds. Nice. Alright, the next column is the waveform column in pink here, and that correlates to which waveform that you want to play. So if we wanted to play the square waveform, that would actually be 0, 1, 2, 3, and we'd put a 3 in this column to play that sound. Alright. And then the next column is the volume column. So as you can see, I put the default at 5, but we could just as easily put in whatever value we wanted from 1 to 7 in order to play that. Now, if we wanted to remove all of these values, it would be as simple as putting in 0 in each one of those volume areas. Okay. Now let's talk about how we can play some longer notes. So in order to play longer notes, you may think that you could just play a single note and it would continue playing until the next one. But instead it just plays short notes. So in order to do this, we need to play multiple of the same note. Alright, and now you can hear that it holds the note as long as the volume is the same. Okay, so moving on to the last column, that is going to be the effect column, and it's a purple color. So in order to insert an effect, we need to put in the appropriate number based on the effects here. Now the easiest ones to explain first off are the fade in and fade out effects, and that's going to be 4 and 5. 4 for fading in, 5 for fading out. So let's go ahead and fade in and fade out each one of these notes. Okay, and hear how this sounds. All right. So if we wanted to wipe out these values, we go ahead and put in a 0 just like we would with the volume column. But in this case, it doesn't actually wipe out the note value, it just wipes out the effect. All right, let's go ahead and try out vibrato. Now this is going to make it sound kind of like it wobbles up and down. Let's go ahead and add it to just a few of the notes and see how that sounds. All right. So as you can see, that gives it kind of a wobbly sound. And let's try the next effect, which is the slide effect. This is going to be value 1. Now, one thing to note, if we use the slide in just random spots, it's not going to make any difference. That sounds exactly like it did before. And the reason for that is that sliding requires there to be a change in the note. So since we are moving from a C note to a C note, and it's the same octave, the same volume, and the same sound, there's no change. So we need to put the 1 here between the C and the D and the E, and the E and the F. Now let's see how that sounds. All right, well that's kind of interesting. So as you can hear, it slides between C to D, D to E, and E to F. Okay, now we've got a few other effects, and in order to use those effects, we're going to wipe this out real quick, and we're going to put in the drop. Now, when I select these buttons, that means that this is the default effect that will be used when playing a note from the keyboard. So you'll immediately hear the effect. Okay, now as you can hear, that has exactly how it sounds. It's a drop, so it goes from this pitch and then it drops all the way to the floor. It drops all the way off. And if we did this in a higher octave, let's say we used octave 3 and 4, it's going to have kind of a laser effect. So that's kind of a cool thing that you can do for sound effects, or maybe you have something interesting in your songs that you want to add in this drop effect. So that is how that works. All right, moving on, we have the arpeggio. And there's 2 sets of arpeggios. The first one, I think the easier one to maybe explain is this one. This is going to be the slower of the 2, and this is actually twice as fast. So if we put in 7, we can hear this effect. All right. Now, the reason that works the way it does is because it's taking this group of 4, and it actually is always a group of 4. So it takes the first group of 4, the second group of 4, the third group of 4, and so on and so forth. So if we were actually to put in an arpeggio here, it's just going to use E and G for these 2 rows right here. So hopefully that's making sense. But essentially what's happening is it's taking C, E, G, and C, and it's playing them on every single row, or it's kind of splitting it up so that it plays it multiple times for these 4 rows. And we can actually hear, with using 6, that it puts in a lot more notes. It repeats it a lot more times. And so that's how the arpeggios work. It basically takes groupings of 4, always 4 at a time, and then it repeats them over and over. And in my next video, I'll kind of show you how you can utilize that for some cool effects. So that pretty much covers the entire tracking view. Like I said before, you can change the speed to change the length of each step. You can change the looping so that it modifies where the loop points are. And if you want to see how it looks in the waveform editor, you can always switch back to the waveform editor and see the same values that you've input into the tracker editor in the waveform editor. So that pretty much concludes all of the details for these views. In the next video, I'm going to go ahead and cover some tips and techniques for how to utilize this into your music and maybe some different sound effects. So until then, enjoy.